Mark Thompson loved his cabin. It was a small wooden house tucked away in the quiet woods just outside the busy town. For Mark, the cabin was a place to relax, breathe fresh air, and forget about his busy city life. He would go there every few weeks to spend time alone, read books, and listen to the sounds of nature. This time, Mark had planned a full weekend at the cabin. He had packed his bags on Friday morning, excited to leave the city behind. But life did not always go as planned. On Friday afternoon, just as Mark was about to leave, his phone rang. It was his boss. "Mark, I'm sorry to bother you, but something urgent came up. We need you back in the city right away." Mark frowned but understood. Work was important, and sometimes emergencies happened. He quickly cancelled his plans, packed up, and started driving back home much earlier than he wanted. The road from the cabin to his neighborhood was long and winding. As Mark drove through the tall trees, he felt a strange feeling in his stomach. It was not just the disappointment of leaving the peaceful cabin early, it was something else. He could not explain it. As he got closer to his neighborhood, the houses appeared one by one, all neatly arranged with clean lawns and freshly painted fences. Mark had lived in this neighborhood for a few years now. It was a quiet, friendly place, or so he thought. Just as Mark turned into his street, he saw something unusual. A police car was parked near the entrance of the neighborhood. Two police officers were standing outside, talking to a woman Mark immediately recognized. It was Karen, the president of the Homeowners Association, or HOA. Karen was a tall woman with short blonde hair and sharp blue eyes. She was known in the neighborhood for being very strict. Some neighbors called her HOA Karen because she often complained about small things and sometimes called the police for minor problems. Many people found her difficult, but she had a lot of control over the neighborhood. Mark stopped his car for a moment, surprised to see the police there. Karen noticed him too and waved slowly. Her smile looked polite but cold. "Welcome back early, Mark," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We've been having some concerns." Mark's heart began to beat faster. He did not know what concerns Karen was talking about. He stepped out of his car and walked toward her, trying to stay calm. The police officers looked serious but did not say anything. "Karen, what's going on?" Mark asked politely. Karen looked around, then spoke quietly so only Mark could hear. "There have been some complaints about your property. Some neighbors say things don't look right. And since you left early from your cabin, we were worried something might be wrong." Mark blinked in surprise. "Complaints? What kind of complaints?" Karen raised her eyebrows. "Oh, you know, things like your fence not matching the rules, or your garden not being well kept. These things matter here. The HOA has rules everyone must follow." Mark felt a little annoyed but tried to hide it. He had always taken care of his property. His garden was simple, but he liked it that way. He had never received any warnings before. "Karen, I haven't changed anything recently," Mark said. "I was at my cabin for the weekend, but I came back early because of work. I didn't expect any problems." Karen nodded but didn't look convinced. "Well, we had to check. You understand how important it is to keep the neighborhood beautiful and safe. That's why I called the police." Mark took a deep breath. The police officers stepped forward and introduced themselves. "Mr. Thompson, we're just here to listen and make sure everything is fine," one officer said kindly. Mark appreciated their calm voices. He looked back at Karen and smiled gently. "I understand the rules, Karen. I always try to follow them. Karen smiled back, but there was something in her eyes that made Mark uneasy. We'll need to see your property deed, she said quietly. Mark's eyebrows rose. A deed was a legal document that showed who owned the property. Why would Karen want to see that? He had never been asked for it before. Of course, Mark said. I have it with me. Karen glanced at the police officers and said, Good. Please bring it inside. We'll review it carefully. Mark nodded and went inside his house to get the deed. As he opened the door, he noticed the quiet street outside. Some neighbors watched silently from their windows. Mark felt their eyes on him, some curious, some cautious. He walked back with the deed in his hands. Karen took it quickly and began to look through the pages. Mark waited nervously, wondering what she would find. Suddenly, Karen's expression changed. The cold smile disappeared, replaced by surprise. She looked up at Mark, her eyes wide. This changes everything, she said softly. Mark was confused. What do you mean? Karen closed the deed and looked at the police officers. I think I need to talk to our HOA lawyer about this. The officers nodded. Karen handed the deed back to Mark. I'm sorry for the trouble. We just want to be sure everything is right. Mark nodded slowly. He had no idea that returning home early from his cabin would lead to such a strange and important discovery. As Karen and the police left, Mark stood in his doorway, staring at the deed in his hands. The quiet neighborhood seemed different now, full of secrets he had never known. What was in the deed that surprised Karen so much? And why was the HOA lawyer suddenly involved? Mark knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning of a story that would change his life and the whole neighborhood forever. After Karen and the police left, Mark closed the door slowly behind them. His heart was still beating fast. The peaceful neighborhood suddenly felt strange and full of tension. He looked down at the deed in his hands again. Why had Karen been so surprised? What could be so special or strange about his property papers? Mark sat down at the kitchen table, trying to calm his thoughts. He knew one thing: something important was hidden in that deed. But what? Later that evening, Mark decided to call his friend Susan. Susan was a smart woman who worked as a real estate agent. She knew a lot about property and legal papers. Maybe she could help. Hi, Susan, Mark said, trying to sound calm. I'm dealing with something strange about my house and the HOA. Can you help me understand this? Susan's voice was warm. Of course, Mark. What's going on? Mark explained the situation: the police, Karen's visit, and the surprise over his deed. Susan listened carefully. Send me a picture or a scan of the deed, Susan said. I'll look at it and tell you what I find. Mark felt a little better. At least he had someone on his side. The next morning, Susan called Mark back. Mark, I looked at your deed carefully. There's something very unusual. What is it? Mark asked, holding his breath. Susan explained, most houses in your neighborhood have the same type of deed, standard ownership papers. But yours is different. Your deed shows that your property has special rights that no one else has. Mark was confused. Special rights? What kind? Susan continued, according to your deed, you have the right to use a private road that others don't have access to. Also, your land includes a small part of the forest nearby that no one else owns. Mark remembered the small path behind his cabin, the one that led deep into the woods. He had always thought it was just part of the forest. but now he realized it was part of his property. "That sounds good, right?" Susan asked. "Yes, but Karen and the HOA never mentioned this," Mark said. "Why would they be upset about this?" Susan paused. "Sometimes, HOA groups don't like when someone has extra rights. They want all houses to be the same and follow the same rules. If you have more land or special access, they might see you as a problem." Mark felt a mix of relief and worry. It was good that his deed was special, but it also explained why Karen was angry. Just then, there was a knock on Mark's door. It was David, the HOA lawyer. Mark had never met him before, but Karen had said she wanted to talk to him. David was a tall man with glasses and a calm voice. "Hello, Mark. I'm here to discuss the deed and your property." Mark invited him inside. David sat down and opened his briefcase. "I've reviewed your deed," David said. "It's clear you have rights that no one else in the neighborhood has. This creates a challenge for the HOA because it changes how the community is managed." Mark looked at David, confused. "But my deed is legal, right?" David nodded slowly. "Yes, it is. There's nothing wrong with your ownership. However, the HOA's rules are designed for typical properties without special rights like yours." Mark thought about Karen and her cold smile. Maybe she wanted to hide this truth from the neighbors. David continued, "Because of this, the HOA cannot force you to follow some rules that others must follow. They also cannot restrict your use of the private road or the forest land you own." Mark felt a small smile. This was good news, but it also explained the tension. David looked serious. "The problem is, the HOA is worried that if this becomes public, other neighbors might want the same rights. This could change everything." Mark understood. The HOA wanted to keep control and avoid changes. But he had every right to enjoy his property as it was. "David, what should I do?" Mark asked. David leaned forward. "The best thing is to stay calm and keep records of everything. Don't let the HOA pressure you into changing your property or giving up your rights. If they try, you may need legal support." Mark felt thankful for David's advice. "Thank you. I want to keep peace, but I also want to protect what's mine." David smiled. "That's smart. I will be available if you need help." After David left, Mark sat back and thought about everything. The cabin, the deed, Karen, and the HOA, it was all connected. He realized this was more than just a neighborhood dispute. It was about standing up for himself and what was right. Mark decided he wouldn't be afraid. He would learn more about his property and the rules, and he would be ready for whatever came next. Later that day, Mark took a walk through the neighborhood. He saw neighbors tending their gardens and children playing. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with a hint of suspicion. Mark smiled softly to himself. The community was a place full of stories and secrets, but he was ready to face them all. The sun began to set, painting the sky with orange and pink. Mark's phone buzzed. It was a message from Karen, "We need to meet again soon." Mark's heart beat faster. The story was not over yet. He looked at his cabin key and whispered, "This is just the beginning." The next day, Mark stood nervously by the small table in his living room, waiting for Karen to arrive. He had read and reread David's advice over and over in his mind, but now, face to face with the woman who had made his life complicated, he felt unsure. The doorbell rang. Mark opened the door to see Karen standing there, her expression calm but serious. She wore a neat blue dress and held a folder under her arm. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, like she owned the place. "Mark," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I wanted to talk to you about the deed and your property." Mark nodded, motioning toward the chairs. Karen sat down gracefully and opened the folder. "I've spent the night looking through your deed again," Karen began. "I have to admit, it surprised me." Mark listened carefully, waiting for what she would say next. "Your deed gives you some unique rights," Karen continued. "But these rights cause problems for the HOA's plans for the neighborhood." Mark frowned. "What kind of problems?" Karen looked away for a moment, then back at him. "The HOA wants to keep things consistent and simple. Your property doesn't fit the usual rules. It's different." Mark felt a mix of frustration and curiosity. "So, you called the police because I returned early?" "Because of my deed." Karen sighed. "I was worried about your property's condition, yes. But it's more than that. The HOA lawyer told me to be careful. If the other neighbors find out you have special rights, they might ask for the same." Mark leaned forward. "But I have the legal right to those things, right? It's in the deed." Karen nodded slowly. "Yes, legally, you do. But the HOA is about the community's rules, and those rules don't always match the law." Mark felt a chill. He had thought the HOA was there to help the neighborhood, not to cause problems. Karen continued, "I'm not your enemy, Mark. I just want to keep peace in the community." Mark looked at her carefully. "Then why not tell me this before calling the police? Why make me feel like I'm a problem?" Karen's eyes softened for a moment. "I'm sorry if it felt that way. I wanted to protect the neighborhood. But I see now that maybe I was too harsh." Mark nodded slowly. "I want to get along with everyone, Karen. I don't want trouble. But I need to protect my rights." Karen closed the folder and stood up. "I understand. Maybe we can find a way to work together." Mark stood too. "I hope so." Before Karen left, she handed him a small envelope. "Here's some paperwork from the HOA. It explains the rules and your rights." Mark took the envelope. He felt the weight of the situation in his hands but also a small hope. As Karen walked out, Mark closed the door behind her. He looked at the envelope again and decided to open it carefully. Inside, there were papers explaining the HOA's rules in simple language. There was also a letter from the HOA lawyer, David, advising neighbors to respect each other's rights and work as a community. Mark smiled. Maybe things could be better after all. But as he looked outside, he saw some neighbors watching from their windows, whispering quietly. The path ahead was not easy, but Mark felt ready. He would learn more about his property and the HOA rules. He would stand up for what was right, but also try to bring peace. That night, Mark sat by the window, thinking about the future. The cabin, the deed, Karen, and the neighbors, they were all part of a story much bigger than he had imagined. The quiet neighborhood held many secrets, and Mark was just beginning to uncover them. The next morning, Mark decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. He wanted to see the place with fresh eyes and maybe talk to some neighbors. After all, living in a community meant more than just following rules, it meant understanding people. As he stepped outside, the cool morning air felt refreshing. Birds sang softly in the trees, and the sun cast warm light on the neat houses. But Mark still felt a bit uneasy. The events with Karen and the HOA had made the neighborhood seem less friendly. Walking down the street, Mark saw Mrs. Wilson tending her garden. She was an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Mark waved, and she returned the gesture. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson," Mark said. "Good morning, Mark," she replied warmly. "I heard about the visit from the HOA and the police. That must have been hard." Mark nodded. "It was a surprise. But I'm trying to understand everything." Mrs. Wilson wiped her hands on her apron. "You're new to all this, but don't worry. The neighborhood can be tricky. People like Karen want order, but sometimes it goes too far." Mark smiled. "I want to get along with everyone. Maybe I can help make things better." Mrs. Wilson looked at him thoughtfully. "That's a good start. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to listen." Mark continued his walk and saw a group of neighbors gathered near the community park. Some looked curious, others cautious. Mark took a deep breath and approached. "Hello," he said. "I wanted to talk with you all about the neighborhood." A man named Paul stepped forward. Paul was friendly and known for organizing community events. "We heard about the deed and the HOA issues," Paul said. "People are talking. Some are worried, some are confused." Mark nodded. "I understand. I didn't mean to cause problems. I just want to explain and listen." A woman named Lisa spoke up. "It feels like the HOA controls everything. Sometimes it feels unfair." Mark agreed. "I've seen that too. But maybe we can work together to make things fair for everyone." The neighbors began to relax and share their thoughts. They talked about their hopes for the neighborhood: clean parks, safe streets, friendly neighbors. Mark listened carefully. He realized that many people felt the same. They wanted peace, but also fairness. After the conversation, Mark felt hopeful. Maybe the neighborhood could become a community where everyone's voice mattered. When Mark returned home, he opened the envelope Karen had given him. Inside was a letter from the HOA lawyer, David, encouraging neighbors to communicate and respect each other's rights. Mark decided to write a letter to the HOA. He wanted to thank them for their work but also ask for clearer communication and fairness. Days passed, and Mark kept talking with neighbors, learning about their stories and hopes. One afternoon, Mark received a phone call from David, the HOA lawyer. "Mark," David said kindly, "I wanted to thank you for your letter. It shows you want to help the community." Mark smiled. "I do. I believe we can make things better." David agreed. "The HOA will hold a meeting soon. It's a chance for everyone to share their thoughts. I hope you'll come." Mark said, "I will." As the sun set, Mark looked out his window at the neighborhood lights. The story was changing. From rules and papers to people and voices. Mark felt ready for the next step. The day of the HOA meeting arrived faster than Mark expected. He woke up early, feeling a mix of nerves and hope. This meeting was important. It was the moment when neighbors could finally speak honestly, and maybe change the neighborhood for the better. Mark wore his best shirt and took a deep breath before heading to the community center. As he walked in, he saw many familiar faces, some smiling, some serious. The room was filled with chairs, a long table at the front, and a projector set up for presentations. Karen was already there, sitting near the front with David, the HOA lawyer. She looked calm but focused. Mark wondered what she was thinking. The meeting started with a greeting from Paul, the friendly neighbor who often organized events. He welcomed everyone and thanked them for coming. "Today," Paul said, "we are here to talk about our community, our neighborhood, our rules, and how we can all live together happily." Mark felt a surge of hope. This was his chance. Next, David stood and explained the role of the HOA. He talked about the rules designed to keep the neighborhood safe and beautiful, but also about the challenges when special cases, like Mark's property deed, come into play. Each property is unique, David said. Sometimes, that creates questions. But our goal is to work together, respect everyone's rights, and find solutions. After the introductions, the floor opened for neighbors to speak. One by one, people shared their thoughts. Mrs. Wilson spoke first. "I've lived here for many years. I want us to be a caring community. We need kindness, not just rules." Another neighbor, Lisa, added, "Sometimes the HOA feels like it is too strict. We want fairness and respect for everyone's property." Mark listened carefully. When it was his turn, he stood up, feeling his heart beat faster. "Hello everyone," he began. "I want to thank you for coming. I know my property is a little different, and that caused some confusion. But I want to be part of this community. I want us to work together and respect each other." Mark took a deep breath and looked around the room. "I hope we can find ways to be fair and friendly. Rules are important, but kindness is more important." Some neighbors smiled, others nodded. Paul clapped quietly, showing support. Karen was next. She stood slowly and spoke clearly. "Mark is right," she said. "I admit I was strict before because I wanted to protect the neighborhood. But I see now that we need to listen and be fair." Karen looked directly at Mark. "I hope we can move forward with respect and understanding." The room was quiet for a moment. Then, a few neighbors started clapping. Slowly, the applause grew louder. Mark felt relief and hope. The rest of the meeting focused on ideas for the future: better communication, clearer rules, and more neighborhood events to bring people together. David promised to help the HOA be more open and fair. He said the lawyer's office would support neighbors who needed advice or help. As the meeting ended, many people came up to Mark to shake his hand and talk. Paul smiled and said, "You did great, Mark. This is a good start." Mrs. Wilson hugged him lightly. "Thank you for listening and caring." Mark smiled warmly. For the first time since all this began, he felt like he truly belonged. Later that evening, Mark sat by the window of his house, looking out at the quiet street. The sky was dark, but the neighborhood lights shone brightly. They felt like small beacons of hope. Mark thought about the journey so far: the cabin, the deed, Karen, the HOA, and now this meeting. It was not just about rules or papers anymore. It was about people, neighbors who wanted to live together in peace and respect. Mark knew there would still be challenges ahead. But tonight, he felt ready. He whispered softly to himself, "This is only the beginning of something good." And with that hope, Mark closed his eyes, ready to face whatever came next. After the successful HOA meeting, Mark felt a new energy inside him. The tension that had filled the neighborhood began to lift. People started greeting him with smiles when he passed by, and he noticed neighbors chatting more openly outside their homes. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt hopeful about his place in the community. A few days later, Mark received a letter in the mail. It was from the HOA board, signed by Karen and David. The letter thanked him for his participation in the meeting and promised that the HOA would work harder to be fair and respectful to all homeowners, especially those with unique situations like his. Mark smiled as he read the letter. It was a small step, but a very important one. With the warmer weather arriving, the neighborhood planned a community picnic in the local park. Paul, the friendly neighbor, invited Mark to help organize it. Mark happily accepted. The picnic was a bright and lively event. Families brought food, children ran and played, and neighbors shared stories and laughter. Mark even introduced himself to a few people he hadn't met before. He realized how important it was to have these moments to build trust and friendship. While walking around the picnic, Mark spotted Karen near the food table. She looked relaxed and even smiled when she saw him. "Mark," she said, "thank you for helping with this. It's nice to see everyone together." Mark nodded. "It is. I'm glad things are changing." Karen looked thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about how we handle the HOA. Maybe we need new ideas to make sure everyone feels heard." Mark smiled. "That sounds like a good plan. I'm happy to help." That afternoon, they talked about ways to improve communication, hold regular meetings, and invite neighbors to share their thoughts. Mark felt hopeful that Karen was sincere. Back at home, Mark decided to take a walk through the small forest area that his deed included. He had never fully explored it before. As he walked along the winding path, surrounded by tall trees and soft sunlight, Mark felt peaceful. This land was his, a place where he could connect with nature and find calm. He stopped near a small stream and sat on a rock, listening to the water's gentle flow. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from David, the HOA lawyer. "Mark," the message read, "I'm glad the meeting went well. If you have time next week, I'd like to meet and discuss how we can support the new HOA plans." Mark quickly replied, "Sounds good. Looking forward to it." As the sun began to set, Mark walked back home feeling a deep sense of contentment. He thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. What started as a conflict had turned into a chance for understanding and cooperation. That night, Mark sat by his fireplace, thinking about the future. He realized that community was not just about rules or property lines. It was about people coming together, listening to each other, and caring. And he felt proud to be part of it. Weeks passed since the community picnic, and the neighborhood felt different. The cold distance between neighbors had melted into warm smiles and friendly conversations. The once tense atmosphere was now filled with hope and understanding. Mark noticed the change every day. Children played freely on the streets, neighbors stopped to chat by their mailboxes, and even Karen seemed more relaxed. The walls that had divided the community were slowly coming down. One morning, Mark received a call from David, the HOA lawyer. "Mark," David said warmly, "the HOA board has agreed to revise some of the rules. We want to make sure they are fair for everyone, including those with unique property rights like yours." Mark felt relief and gratitude. "That's great news, David. I'm glad the HOA is listening." David continued, "Also, we're starting a monthly newsletter to keep everyone informed. And we plan to have regular meetings where neighbors can share ideas." Mark smiled. "That sounds wonderful. I'll help spread the word." As the days grew warmer, the community garden near the park blossomed with colorful flowers and fresh vegetables. Mark joined a small group of neighbors who cared for the plants. It was another way to connect, work together, and build trust. One evening, Mark saw Karen walking her dog near his cabin. She stopped and smiled. "Hi, Mark," she said. "I wanted to thank you for everything. You helped us all see that working together is better than fighting." Mark nodded. "Thank you, Karen. I'm glad we found a way forward." Karen's expression softened. "Me too. It's a new beginning." As summer turned into fall, Mark often walked through the forest land that was part of his property. It was a special place for him, a quiet refuge where he could think and find peace. One afternoon, as he sat by the stream, Paul joined him. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" Paul said. Mark smiled. "It is. I'm glad it's part of the neighborhood now, not just mine." Paul nodded. "You've helped all of us grow. Sometimes, a little courage and kindness can change everything." Mark felt a warmth inside. This journey had taught him many things about standing up for himself, about listening, and about the power of community. One night, as Mark sat by his fireplace, he looked around his cozy cabin. The walls held memories of struggle and hope. The windows looked out onto a neighborhood that was no longer divided but united. Mark thought about how far he had come. From the surprise visit of Karen and the police, to the discovery of his special deed, the tense meetings, and finally, to friendship and understanding. He smiled softly and whispered, "This is home." The next day, the neighborhood held a small celebration in the park. Neighbors brought food, music filled the air, and laughter echoed through the trees. Mark looked around at the faces, friends who had become family. Karen came up beside him and said, "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Mark nodded. "Yes, we have. And I'm grateful for every step." As the sun set behind the trees, Mark felt a deep peace. The challenges were not gone, but they had been faced together. In the end, it was not the deed, the rules, or the property that mattered most. It was the kindness, the respect, and the courage to build a true community. Mark knew that whatever the future held, he would face it with hope, strength, and the support of his neighbors. And that was the greatest gift of all.